Hello and welcome to the last of our installments of European imperialism. This presentation is Notes 11.2D, and this is Mr. Marks. This section is going to talk largely about the European influence into China. The time period we're talking about is the end of the Qing dynasty, also known as the Manchu dynasty. This is the last ruling dynasty of China. It rules from 1644 until 1912. It'll be restored just for a short period of time in 1917 before it's overthrown again. It's preceded by the Ming dynasty, and the group that follows that will be the Republic of China, and following that will be the People's Republic of China. The Qin dynasty was not a really strong dynasty. There was a lot of warring going on between the different warlords of the region. The emperor had very little actual control of the country, and these warlords would have almost total control over their own separate regions. But because they weren't working together, it made it very easy for European powers to be able to pit one warlord against the other and to take total control of almost all of China by the early 1900s. An example of this is the Opium War, or the Opium Wars. These were wars that were fought between the British and the Chinese, and it really doesn't paint the British in the best of lights. You see, the British had wanted to force open Chinese markets to the opium that they were selling. If you remember in our last presentation, I mentioned that the Indian people had a reduced production of food. One of the reasons for this is a lot of their farmland was converted over to opium production, which people already understood that it had very addictive properties, that there were not always great things behind it. In fact, Britain had made the selling of certain opiates illegal in Britain itself, but they were now forcing the sale of these onto the Chinese. They were basically drug dealers. Among that, they were doing unfair trade disputes and trying to treat China kind of like one of its colonies, forcing them to only buy products from Great Britain and to only sell to them. So the Chinese rebelled against these ideas and fought, sometimes attacking these merchants who were crossing their borders illegally, trying to make opium illegal. And Britain sent in its army. And over a series of wars, the first Opium War going from 1839 to 1842, and the second Opium War going from 1856 to 1860, established their dominance over China. Both of these wars would end up with Britain winning and China losing. And a series of treaties, which will be called the unequal treaties, will be forced onto China. And one of the main things that this did is it opened up certain ports, like the port of Hong Kong, a major city on a river outlet, a major trading post for China, was now to be put completely into British control. In fact, it's only recently, within the last decade, that control of Hong Kong reverted back to China. In rebellion against these foreign influences, one of the worst conflicts the world has ever seen sprang up. From 1850 to 1864, there was a civil war in China that's now often called the Taiping Rebellion. There was a Christian convert by the name of Hong Jiquan. Hong Jiquan was not your normal kind of Christian convert. He believed that he was actually Jesus's brother, and that he was sent down to earth in order to keep China outside of European control. Now, he then led this rebellion, and a lot of Chinese flocked to him. He created his capital in Nanjing, and the Qin or the dynasty was not able to hold up against him. Um, Before you start making Hong Jiquang into a complete hero, though, you need to know his religious ideas, from first saying he was the brother of Jesus, actually started getting a little bit crazier beyond that. He started making statements saying that sex of any kind, even between married people, was against God's will. And that ended up turning a lot of his converts away. Had his ideas not gone more into the kind of the crazy area, he probably would have been able to keep even more support. That said, this Civil War had many people involved. Like I said, it's the bloodiest conflict in human history. 50 million people died. That tops any war by tens of millions. And uh, even though many Chinese, like Mao Zedong, who will take over China for the communists, will look on Hong Jiquan as a liberator and this person that's pushing against European control. At the same time, the bloodiness of this ends up actually pushing China more deeper into European debt. They simply don't have the manpower in order to deal with these huge, just staggering losses. Over time, the Qing government will end up receiving aid from Germany and Great Britain, and France, who will supply troops and weapons and will then directly fight off the Taiping Rebellion. And the downside of that was it firmly put China into European control. China was divided into many spheres of influence. Each sphere was controlled by a different European power who had laid claim to that region. Hong Kong and the area around it, as well as the area that bordered British India, would all be under the control of, well, India. The French would be able to push northward from French Indochina, which they had colonized earlier, and take control of that area. The Germans would take control of an area right around the mouth of the Yellow River. All in all, most of the ports were taken over by European powers, and the Chinese government itself was not able to trade there freely. These areas which the Europeans had control of are called spheres of influence. These are areas in which an outside power, like European powers, claim exclusive investment and or trading rights. This right here, this map, shows the spheres of influence up until about 1910, which is the start of the United States' open door policy. On the left, you have a cartoon showing European powers cutting up China, dividing it up between them. The different people there are actually world leaders of the time: Queen Victoria, Otto von Bismarck, etc. The United States, though, and I'd like to say this for altruistic reasons, but it's not. No, we simply wanted to have an open market. The United States, because of the Spanish-American War, had gained possession of the Philippines, and that gave them a door into Asia. The U.S. was really disturbed that all of the ports were taken over and that the U.S. wasn't able to trade with China, which still had a large population, and thus many places to sell. So the United States made the other countries sign what was called the open door policy. And each of these different powers, because they wanted some influence into other areas, spheres of influence, were willing to agree to this. What it basically said is all European powers had some rights to trade wherever they wanted to in China, basically to open the doors to trade. These uh, this didn't work out perfectly for the US. This ended up making it so now businesses of all of the different companies got into sometimes very bloody conflicts, trying to establish railroad rights or mining rights or loans or foreign trade ports. Without having to consult the Chinese government at all, like the cartoon with the Chinese emperor and his hands in the air. He really had no control over what was going on in his country, and even the U.S.'s open door policy showed that even further. Resentment for European influence did end up leading to a darker part of Chinese history, which is the Boxer Rebellion. Not as bloody as the Taiping Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion was well known through Europe because the Boxers believed that a big part of the problem were the missionaries. And so they actually went in and started killing off missionaries, Christian missionaries that had set up residences in China. The Boxers, which is not really the correct name, they are the Righteous Fists of Harmony, or the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. The British are the ones that just said, oh, harmonious fists, you mean boxers, right? The Boxers started this rebellion in 1898, and it lasted until 1901. It took place in response to all of this European growth, expansion, the large number of missionaries that were in there. These Boxer fighters finally ended up gathering in Beijing in June of 1900 and attacked the embassies of the different countries themselves. They got the Empress Dowager, who was ruling in the emperor's name, since the emperor at the time was just a child, to declare war on the foreign powers. So they actually forced China to declare war on these different European powers. The Europeans retreated at first from this rebellion, but then replied in massive force and wiped out the Boxers. You can see why even today there's a lot of resentment for in Asia, and especially in China, for what they fear to be too much European or U.S. interference in their country. So as a quick review, how did European powers get control of the major cities in China? How did the European powers divide up China? What was the role of the U.S. in all of this? And how did the Chinese react to outside intervention? And you should have two different rebellions that you can look at for that.